Hello there. This month, I've been spotlighting members of a family of educators, and today we conclude with Kelly. Her story resonates deeply with me, reflecting much of what I've experienced in public education, more so than her parents' stories. And I've been reflecting on why this is. Both Kelly and I started teaching when the profession had already become overwhelmingly challenging, unlike when her parents began their careers, a time when teaching was more respected and manageable. Perhaps it's this shared starting point that gives Kelly and me a different perspective. However, what truly unites our experiences is something far more disturbing. We've both faced the chilling reality of a student wishing us harm. In the second part of this episode, Kelly will share her personal encounter with this frightening issue. Unfortunately, such threats and acts of violence against educators are becoming all too frequent. I'll repeat this message at the beginning of both parts of Kelly's episode. While Kelly provides her firsthand narrative, my story is fictionalized in my book. However, even after 5 years, I know that running into the student who once wished me harm would still cause a sinking feeling in my stomach, make me shake, and likely bring me to tears. So it is fair to say I am still affected by it to some degree, as is she. In our current educational climate, educators must take these threats seriously, yet we often face accusations of overreacting when we do. But can we truly overreact to the fear of being physically harmed or even killed? I believe we are underreacting, both as an educational system and as a society, by expecting educators to endure this as a routine aspect of their profession. If this has been a portion of your personal experience, please see today's show notes for resources to help with the long-term effects of trauma.
I gave the majority of my 10-year span of teaching, I gave all of myself to teaching, but then also to extra duties and, so things after school. And so like, especially the past couple of years. So when we got married last year, I started cutting out a lot of kind of the extra duty. And it's interesting because, it makes you feel like, and I think this word for me has come up a lot in conversations with my husband about teaching, just inadequate or maybe lazy even. I wish I knew how much I miss not knowing that we're all screwed.
A few years ago, I started writing a fictitious story based on my time as an educator. It is called Taught, and the story was partially inspired out of anger and frustration fueled by burnout. Okay, actually it was more than partially inspired by anger and frustration. But Taught has also become a vehicle for me to tell what I thought at the time, and in some ways continue to think, was and is the real story of teaching. I now realize that my perspective is not everyone's perspective, but there are some pieces of Taught that resonated with many educators. This podcast is an extension of that story, and I, a former teacher, will interview other educators asking them to share how they really feel about the current state of education. Why are so many teachers burn out? Why are so many, like me, leaving the field? We likely won't solve any problems or come up with any solutions, but we can create a community of voices that maybe begin the conversation around how educators can take back teaching. I'm Melissa LaFleur. Welcome to Taught, the podcast. Today I have Kelly with me. She is a middle school language arts teacher and the final member of our teacher family in our May series highlighting a family of teachers. Kelly went to school with my oldest daughter and even observed for a practicum in my very own classroom back in the day. Now she is a teacher in her own right, and she has been for 10 years. Today, Kelly will share with us why, after a short but successful career, she is now thinking of leaving. Also, I put a disclaimer at the beginning of this episode, but I want to remind everyone again that Kelly and I are going to talk about the ultimate trauma some educators face but rarely talk about: having your life threatened by a student. If this is a topic that has the potential to be triggering for you, please stop here and look at today's show notes for resources to help you or someone you care about cope with this increasingly prevalent issue in the education community. For today, Kelly and I will unpack this and many other things that take a young, thriving teacher out of the classroom and into a tough job market, believing that is a better, safer, less stressful option. Kelly, welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit about kind of what brought you to education.
So I think what brought me to education was truly my parents. Both growing up as teachers, or I was growing up. My parents were teachers. I heard a lot of stories in the classroom, and I heard about just how every day is different, and just kind of the enjoyment of getting to impact young lives. And so I think that for me, it started whenever I was even in high school. And I had some wonderful I had a wonderful English teacher. She was my all-time favorite. And I had her a couple of years in different classes. And so I think just kind of combined with some of my experiences as a student with some really great teachers, English specifically, and my parents really encouraged me to go into education. And so I think I started out in music ed. I wanted to be a choir teacher. And when I got to college, I took some music classes, and I was overwhelmed with kind of the course load and just trying to find balance between my classes and working. And I burnt out on music pretty quickly. But I think one area for me that was huge was always reading and writing, and just having that experience with my one of my favorite teachers in high school, and the fact that my mom is reading specialist, and just her love of literature. I had this idea of switching over to English education, started taking those classes, and I never grew tired of it, and I never looked back. So the rest is history with English. And so I think for me, it was whenever I started student teaching, I realized like this is something that I want to do. And it's not just the fact that my parents were teachers and encouraging me to take education classes in college, but it was when I was in the classroom and I had a wonderful cooperating teacher who, I think maybe 3 weeks into my student teaching semester, she left and she said, "Okay, I'll see you later. I'll see you in November." And just like, kind of let me do my own thing, that I really started connecting, and leaving each day feeling like I have a purpose, for what I want to do with my life. I can connect with these kids. I have like a good rapport with them, and love getting to teach language arts. I love getting to teach, topics like figurative language and elements of fiction. And I chose middle level specifically because I had some really bad experiences in middle school. I think most, as most everybody does, those awkward years. But I found like that was my area, and student teaching, in a seventh grade classroom, that was something that I found myself, really passionate about, especially with working with kind of the awkward, middle schooler, and just kind of quirky and sarcastic. And it was really great. I think the student teaching semester was what really made it so that I wanted to go into teaching middle level, English. And so I did. I found a job um in the same district where I student taught. And and that's where I've spent the past 10 or so years, is in the same district, and teaching middle school English.
Yeah.
So seventh grade mainly. I've added a few years of eighth grade in there as well, doing kind of a split situation, but mostly seventh grade.
I mentioned in the intro, you've been doing this for 10 years and you have some changes coming up for you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about kind of what made you decide to go this route?
Yeah, so I did recently put in my resignation. And but this it's not just happened this year. It's been kind of years long endeavor of this pathway of trying to figure out um what I'm going to do next in my life. And so I think for me it really started around the pandemic. So I think it started right around, for me it was year 7, so 4 years ago. And it I feel like there were always issues in education that could be glossed over, or they were smaller, but I think through the pandemic had kind of magnified. And so each year it has been a steady decline, with even from where I started 10 years ago, to now completely different culture, I guess, of students, of parents.
When you get to that place and you know you're not coming back, you realize that you have really committed. I'm not, I don't want to speak for you, but for me, all of a sudden I was like hit in the face with my own over commitment that I
Mm.
had, you know, given my heart and soul to education. And when I got to the finish line and I started taking some of my life back for me, I realized what a sacrifice I had made. And I also had this feeling of, because when you get to the end, and actually I wrote a book and I put this in there, you get to the end and you're ending, and it almost feels like a grieving that you go through. And you get to physically see everybody else moving on without you. And it makes you
Mhm.
question what your position was and what the value of that position was. It's such a weird
Mm.
place to be in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think that for me, the it started not necessarily even this year, but knowing, especially like after meeting my husband, um realizing that there does need to be more of a work life balance. And that I gave the majority of my tenure span of teaching, I gave all of myself to teaching, but then also to extra duties, and so things after school. And so, like, especially the past couple of years, so when we got married last year, I started cutting out a lot of kind of the extra duty. And it's interesting because um it makes you feel like, and I think this word for me has come up a lot in conversations with my husband about teaching, just inadequate, or maybe lazy even. That because I'm not committing myself to after school duties, and getting involved in that way, because I'm not a coach. And I've not ever been a coach. I've done, early on, I did a lot more of, I did assistant play director. I led the talent show. I did as much extra duty as I possibly could. So I worked most every game. So it's like Tuesdays, Thursday nights, weekends, tournaments and things like that. But cutting some of that out, and like especially this year with changing my commute. So my commute has gone from 10 minutes, to about 45 minutes to an hour,
Yeesh.
one way each way, depending on traffic and that kind of thing. So it just I just won't do it. And even being asked to cover classrooms where there are no substitutes happens on a daily basis. And I won't do that either. At my So I switched schools this year. And so at my old school we were told that,
Yeah.
like, hey, if we're taking the ISS schedule from you guys, so you don't have to cover ISS, but you do have to cover classrooms. So if I was on for a week, that means a week of no plan time.
Yeah.
Um, and so at this school, we do have ISS, but then they say like, hey, if you want to volunteer, which I never do, because I want to use my plan time, so I can get my work done at school and leave
Yeah.
by contract time. And that is not something that has happened, overnight, or even with the decision of resigning. That's taken place for years, and feeling like, I'm not giving enough of myself to my job. So then I'm not doing the best job that I can as a teacher by not giving myself, and giving of my time whenever I
Hmm.
am there, to helping out, or like, it's like always like the good of the cause.
Right.
But like or you do it for your family. It's we're not family, we're coworkers. We should be in a professional setting, and our time should be valuable.
Absolutely. One of the things that I really noticed whenever I left Kansas and I started working in Washington, I used this phrase all the time. I would say, I don't want to get in trouble. And my teaching partner said to me one day, "What is with you? Why do you always think every little thing you're going to get in trouble?" And I had to pause and think about that. And one of the things that really hit me is that and I'm not a big union person, so I always hate when I say this, but it's the truth. The unions were so much stronger in that area. Yeah, you do feel like you don't have very many rights. Even though we are in the biggest teacher shortage in the history of education, I am still hearing when I do interviews from people in your area that people are being treated like they're lucky to have a job. No, they are lucky to have all of you.
Hmm.
I mean, and this was going on however long, 2015 when I left, 10
Hmm.
years ago. I was
Hmm.
like, ooh, no, I don't like being treated this way.
Hmm.
And what's sad is that the pay is not that great in that area of the world either. So it's really frustrating
Hmm.
that I know your family and I know you feel like I know you and your values. And I know that you did not go into this lightly. Sure you didn't mean to go after 10 years. I think you probably wanted to make this a career. And it's sad
Hmm.
that you're not getting that opportunity. But I'm also proud of you for
Yeah, and
advocating for yourself.
that's thank you. Yeah, it's I don't think without the support of my husband that I would have made this decision to leave. I think, you know, being a part of with my parents both teaching, both educators, um, and a part of like their generation is that basically you do stick it out regardless. And I think even like where they are with being nearly 40 years into teaching, like that is their life choice. Like that's their path, and they're going to be there until retirement. Something that I had talked about even with friends that I teach with, who have taught twice as long as me. So, they're in 20 years, they're feeling the same things of wanting to leave. And I've talked to my husband a lot about, for me, 10 years is a drop in the basin of my career. And it has been probably 4 years. Each year it's like, okay, well, it's got to get better. Like things have got, like, hopefully things have got to change. And I get into these years, and I mean right off, from the very beginning, like the very first day, I can kind of tell how things are going to go. And I keep telling myself, why do I keep doing this to myself? It's not even how it was 10 years ago,
Yeah.
with teaching. Um, and I find myself a lot of times with the decision that, the district that I'm in, with the decisions they make, as a kind of district level, why are they not taking into consideration that we are in a teacher shortage? They don't treat it like we are. And I think my teacher friends who are in the district with me, there are some things that have come up. Um, for instance, last year there were two middle schools in the district that had two ELA teachers that were leaving. So I was leaving my position at one of them. Another language arts teacher had left, and then two language arts teachers at another school. So the district decided that since there are two open ELA positions at both middle schools, they were going to cut one of the ELA positions at both schools and then have teachers fill in house. Um, and I mean, it was principals going to science teachers and math teachers and people who have like those K-9 degrees, and saying like, hey, would you be willing to give up one of your plan times, for a little extra money to take a section of language arts, which is greatest, like the most tested subject.
Yep.
That there are still hiring social studies teachers that are leaving, or they're still hiring science teachers, but they're cutting ELA positions, and they don't necessarily need to do that. And they shouldn't. But there are just decisions that the district makes that they aren't taking into consideration that we are in a teacher shortage, and they don't treat it that way. And yeah, they don't treat, you know, teachers in with any sort of respect. And I think probably the biggest thing is like with parents. The district that I work in, um, district officials, like above our admin, will kind of bow to parents, and with decisions that parents make, and there's not as much support for the teachers, but there's more support for parents and things that they do, that makes the job just very difficult.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like from the top down that we are supported because of it.
Well, I don't think that's just a feeling. I don't think that you are.
I think what's the best route for me and for my family is moving out of the classroom, and hopefully into the library. So I'm working on a master's in library science, and this is my second master's. I had already completed my master's in education, thinking that education was the route that I was going to, the path that I was going to take for my career. Um, but I think with librarianship, I think it takes the best parts of education, and it leaves kind of the icky parts that have become overwhelming, and just get to really enjoy, helping students. If it's like even in a public library or if it was in a school library, I'm kind of looking at both pathways. Helping students still find their passion for reading, because I think that's something that I'm passionate about. I love researching, so there's also kind of that aspect of it. But just taking the best parts of education and then making it so that the job is just not as overwhelming or frustrating as it has been. So
Yeah, I think that I'm hopeful that eventually I will get to have a real-time librarian come on and do the podcast because um, the librarians that I've talked to all are not in your area of the world. They are in a different area of the United States. But what I'm hearing is that some of these lingering issues that like you said, we had them before the pandemic, but the pandemic just like put everything under the microscope and brought it all out and kind of exacerbated it. Um, those Some of those things are really affecting our librarians. For example, we always had a shortage of substitutes, and the librarians are the first to get pulled and brought into the classroom to sub for the day. And that is really hard for them because I think that this is something that anybody who works in a school, we all tend to forget what everyone else has to do for their job because we're so busy thinking about ours and getting what we need to get done. So teachers, I'm only going to speak for teachers. Oftentimes we look at our library resources as kind of an extra plan time, right? Oh, today's my library day. I can drop my kids off and I can go get a snack. It's treat day in the staff room. So, we're not really thinking that there's a curriculum that librarians have to follow as well. In addition to that, most librarians have become responsible for digital citizenship in a
Mm,
time when that desperately needs to be taught. So they have a curriculum, they have certain things that they have to get through, and they're seeing every class in the building. They're having to
mm,
build some sort of relationship with every kid. Is just hugely overwhelming. And then when we pull them and put them in a classroom to sub for the day, we are basically saying, that resource is not as valuable as it really is. Very frustrating. So
absolutely.
I want you to talk about that when you start interviewing. Will I be substituting? I'm
Yeah.
out. I'm only working for districts that won't put the librarians in as substitutes.
I think probably the biggest or one of the biggest concerns with librarians, especially in my district in this area, are the book challenges that have been coming up. Um, on top of um, the classes that they teach and the fact that they support everybody in the school, in administrators included, we've had an overwhelming amount of book challenges that librarians are constantly questioned with the books that are on their shelves. They're not these aren't even books that are content related or even like curriculum related. They're specifically books that are in the library cataloging system that parents are going through with a fine-tooth comb and finding certain books on their shelves, and that has been a huge issue to school librarianship. And especially in my district, that we've even talked about in my master's classes, that people around the country have heard about, what is going on in this particular area, in Kansas, and it's a huge issue. So
Wow. So what do you think is going to happen with that?
mm, I don't know. Books continue to get pulled, and I think in this district in particular, they do. I think that district officials are scared of parents, and they lead with that fear. And that, I mean, I know as a classroom teacher, we were told, what was it, maybe 2 years ago, with a new um superintendent, that kind of thing, that we were going to need to inventory our own classroom libraries, and then make sure that those lists were available for parents each year, so that if parents had any questions about what their kids were checking out, we could tell them what was on our personal classroom library list. Which is just funny to me because I over the years I've spent, I can't even tell you how much money, hundreds of dollars, on providing an updated and relevant classroom library for my students. And I think other teachers, we do the same. And I've taken donations over the years and things like that. And so, it is a curated classroom library, but to be questioned, even just with getting those books checked out, it's just another um, kind of area where I don't feel supported, and that we don't feel supported. And I know that school librarians are kind of feeling that as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up. And I think it speaks to this lack of trust that the public has in our profession. And I'm talking
Mhm.
about education from top to bottom. There is
Mhm.
this, I, I personally don't go to the dentist and question their practices and what toothpaste they're using and the type of dental floss and those sorts of things. And as a English language arts teacher and an English person, I mean, being able to think about things critically and discuss them is definitely important. But to go in and tell other professionals that their professional judgment is wrong based on nothing but your own personal moral values, I think that's a slippery slope.
Mhm. Yeah, the quote that was used by a parent who is challenging books is that teachers and librarians are grooming students by what books we have on our shelves. Um, that came up last year, and we actually had the superintendent come by every single school, and have language arts teachers come in and have a quick meeting with him, with all the ELA teachers in the school, so he could tell us that he knows that that's not true, and I mean that it's asinine, that's even being said, but that's I think that kind of in a nutshell is how even parents view education, or at least that's in my experience. um how, like you said, how we're treated as not professional, as not the experts in our field, but that we're not even on the same team as parents, but we are out to get kids. I feel like that's very much the direction of teaching and education, that I'm not, working in your student's best interest. I'm out to get your student.
Yeah.
And I want to, so yeah, that's just kind of the way how I have been feeling with teaching. So,
Yeah, well, rightfully so. I don't know if you remember this or not, and I don't know the exact law, but this was when I was still in Kansas. There was a law that they were trying to get passed that was if a teacher had a book or exposed students to a book that was on the banned list, they could actually serve jail time. And that
wow.
list was fluctuating. I don't know if it was passed or not. I think it was a bill that had made it to the House. Um, but as far as Kansas goes, this was just a Kansas thing. But yeah, I mean, that's very sad to me, all of it, because there's so much great literature. And I know for myself, even literature that discusses things that are not my own personal values, I think is an eye opener to the world around me. This world that we live in is not a place where we all have the same experiences and look at it through the same lens. And literature gives us a safe place to examine that.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I
Well,
want to teach my kids that, reading is about learning about empathy, and being empathetic towards others who have different walks of life. And I just feel like we've gotten very, very much far away from what the purpose of reading is. There's another one. But the and the thing is that kids aren't reading these days anyway. It's the devices, it's, the
mhm.
district issued Chromebooks, or iPads, or things like that, that these devices in the hands, that kids are more focused on than reading. And I just feel like we have really lost the purpose of what reading is, and how important it is, to students' overall education, and overall understanding of other students, and other walks of life.
Absolutely. And just having devices be the primary. There's actually a ton of research that's coming out now with all sorts of things from attention deficit disorder to just brain development in young people and the amount of time that they're spending on screens, which is,
Mhm.
and it makes me sick to my stomach to think about how much money has been spent to make sure that we have screens in kids' hands
Mm.
all the
Yeah.
time while they're at school, and how some of that research is probably going to start changing that, which is a good thing, in
Mm.
my opinion.
Yeah.
We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We do need computers. We do need that technology to do a variety of things in the classroom. This is the way of the world, and kids need to be exposed to using technology, but and using it correctly.
Mhm.
But I have a feeling there will be changes on the horizon for how much time students are allowed to be on screens in the classroom. Eventually, it's going to be a work in
Mm.
process, I think.
Mhm.
Well, all of this leads
Mhm.
me to ask you, this podcast really just came from a place of my own burnout. And then I wrote a book and told my story. And then I was like, well, this is not everybody's story. Um, and I mean, you're my target audience right here, Kelly, because 10 years, you actually made it longer. The average burnout rate for new teachers is
Hmm.
4 years. And I really feel like when I was teaching about year 4, I was finally figuring out how to
Mhm.
teach.
Yes.
So we're losing teachers at that point, but you stuck it out for 10. Um, what are your thoughts on burnout? How are things going this year? Are you seeing any improvement?
I personally, I'm not. I When it comes to burnout, I don't necessarily think that there are any resources that are given to us in the district to help out with that. I think the first time that resources to help out with burnout, so making sure that you're taking care of your mental health, counseling services, things like that, those came into conversation through the pandemic, but that was the first time, and that was in my 7th year of teaching. Really, other than that, it's a PD session at school here and there to talk about, oh, well, we needed to take care of our mental health. Oh, we need to do this and that. But then, taking care of mental health and burnout for me, it's like I need time. I need time given to us, like to me, to grade papers at school, or to have these PD days where they fill up with meetings. Maybe having those days where we've got teacher work time. That was something that was actually given to us my first few years of teaching. That when PD days would be back to back at the beginning of a semester. One day would be filled of meetings, but then the next day would be the teacher work time. That has completely gone by the wayside since the pandemic, and since I don't know, information that needs to be given to us all in our meeting times. So they fill up the meeting times at school with meetings, with professional development, with some of the sessions are not even really relevant to what's going on. And I think for me, in the back of my mind, I've always wondered where that work time went, where we truly just have time to work in our classrooms. And I think because we've got some teachers that don't necessarily use that time wisely, that we don't trust the teacher to be able to use that time wisely. So we are not given any work time on those PD days that could be used. I think that has led to my burnout, a part of it, a little part of it. And yeah, I don't feel a lot of support with what is going on in my own classroom. And trying to think, I have like I've got into a brain fart a bit. What was the second part of your question?
Well, I'm just wondering, but you've kind of gone into it. What actually is fueling burnout here. And you answered the
Mm,
question. It's not getting any better. I do want to say you used a term in your survey that I had never heard. And if you don't
mm,
mind, I'd like you to speak a little to that. The term
sure.
was lawnmower parents, which I love this. I looked it up and I was like, oh, yeah,
Hmm.
I hope she talks about this. So I have a feeling,
Hmm.
based on your survey, that this lawnmower parent type is also fueling burnout. Can you talk
Hmm.
a little bit about that?
Yes. So there that I learned that term through a teacher blog that I had read a few years ago, that we're moving away from the helicopter parent. Where and I feel like even I had one of those whenever I was going through school.
I might have been one
To
myself. So
well, and I think, um to a degree, it's important, because then you're showing that you are taking an interest in what's going on in school, and in your child's life at school, and that has changed drastically. That is, even caring about your kids' schoolwork, that is not the rule anymore. That's the exception. From my experiences, I do deal with a lot of lawnmower parents, and so whenever I read that term and they described it, it's absolutely so true. So it's like the lawnmower parent mows down any obstacles. um, we aren't allowing, and I should say parents aren't allowing their students to fail, and the students to find ways to solve their problems. And every year that continues to get worse, where it is like this learned helplessness. And I think a lot of it came from remote teaching, or I guess remote learning, where students were not necessarily held accountable for their work. And that has just continued to, I mean, it's grown, and it's just funny to me that through each year that we come back into school and we talk about, the issues and the problems and things like that, this is one area that we don't address, is the fact that kids are not getting their work turned in. Um, and whenever I enter in grades into the grade book and it's a 0 and it's marked as missing, I can't tell you how many parents I've had this past year email me and say, "Well, what did you do with that assignment? Where was that? He said he got it turned in." Or it's marked as a 0. Why is that? Well, it's because it's missing. And so the thing is that parents are having more conversations with me about their students' work than they are with their students about their work.
yes.
And I think that is that is a huge monster that has been created that nobody seems to address. And it kind of goes back to that, like, that accountability has been placed on me to make sure that if I have 35 kids failing, which I did, because when we got to the end of our research paper here about, a month ago, I had 35 students not turn their papers in. And that is the most I've ever had. I've taught this research paper for 10 years now. Um, but the expectation is that I'm reaching out to parents, that I am providing time after school for the kids to work. Um, that I'm always tracking it down. Do I get responses from parents? No.
Is that
Um,
expectation coming from the parents or is it coming from your administrator or
it's
both?
coming it's coming from administrators. I'm not even sure with parents, because I don't typically hear back from them anymore. Usually if a parent is reaching out is because they are upset about something. Um, of what's going on. And even if I send out, proactively send out emails to say, "Hey, this deadline's coming up for this big paper, and this is a big project." I don't hear back from parents. But it is interesting because it is admin saying, "Hey, you need to make sure that you are connecting with parents and that you're letting them know, um, that their kids are failing for, whatever reason." But we never talk about the accountability on the parents.
Yeah.
And so it ends up feeling like, okay, well, here's an extra part or I guess maybe on top of the job that I have of entering in grades and grading and that kind of thing, I also need to be on top of every student's grade and reaching out to every parent, about every student's grade. And that has actually been overwhelming this year. I've moved from a Title I school to a more affluent school, and it's just it's just interesting, a part of that culture, um, with seeing more responsibility in my school, where there were kids that were, low income students versus kids who are not, and just the amount of work that is never turned in.
Work avoidance has just escalated in the student population. And I think you did make a really probably accurate connection to pandemic learning, where I was an online teacher for 1 year of that with this big Pearson Connexus online teaching tool. And so parents could opt in for that. And so I was hired just for a year to teach in that capacity. So I had a caseload of 45 families. It was because the parents were supposed to be assisting because it's all online teaching. I wasn't teaching anything. I just set up study groups to go along with it and kind of tracked them and made sure they stayed on track. And this one family, boy, well, there was more than one family that gave me a lot of hassle about this, but there was one family in particular where when I finally got the parent on the phone, she said, "Oh yeah, you were sending me too many emails, so I blocked you." And I'm like, this is an online program, lady. How am I supposed to communicate with you? You signed a document at the beginning of this saying that we would be communicating this way. And you said
Hmm.
this was the way to contact you. So when we have adults with no accountability and they're teaching their kiddos that accountability piece is not important, we end up with 35 students who don't feel like they have any skin in the game for turning in a research paper.
Well, and it doesn't help that the schools don't hold students back anymore. So it's not a part of, um, you know, in middle school, they wait until high school where, the schooling, quote unquote, actually counts. And so, but by that time when they get into high school, and they have failed year after year after year, those habits have already been built, and we're not doing anything, at least in my district, we're not doing anything in the middle level, to hold students accountable, to hold parents accountable, for these grades that are supposed to be so important, to their education. Um and and I think that's something that has been it's been in that's been a battle probably since day one. But it has become a gaping wide issue, just a huge issue, um specifically since online learning during the pandemic.
I never understood why middle schools did not hold students back, because if those grades don't really quote unquote count, why not have somebody repeat a sixth grade math class
Right.
or a sixth grade ELA class or a sixth grade science class?
Hmm.
You said it doesn't count. So if it doesn't count till they get in high school, isn't it better for them to have that lesson to actually have a real world consequence for the behavior you chose,
Hmm.
and then it not have any impact on when they graduate?
Hmm.
Whereas the other way around, this impacts when they graduate. So anyway, I
Hmm.
don't get it. I feel like middle school is also, this was a, okay, now I'm going to go on a little rant, Kelly. This was such a frustration point for me. I around the pandemic, but middle school of all places would have been one of the easier ones to let's look at some things that we're doing and shake things up and try some things. You're in this weird in-between world already, right?
Mhm.
We already have the foundation of education. Kids know they need to come to school. They learned everything they needed to as far as that foundational stuff in elementary, ideally. Um, they're heading into this world where there's going to be some rigorous expectations. So we've got this odd spot, we middle school teachers. Why didn't we play around more with that in the pandemic? I mean,
Hmm.
actually, I had several middle school friends. I wasn't teaching that during the pandemic, but holy cow. I mean, they were expected to do everything the way they had always done it online. It was unbelievable
Hmm.
because we cover a lot of content in middle school. And so
Hmm.
then to expect kids to be covering that on their own at home, that was the other thing that really irritated me. And again, I'm going to end up repeating myself a ton on this podcast. But if it was easy to teach yourself things, everybody would be doing it.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's not easy to just read a book and learn all the content from that book, especially when you're 12, 13, 14 years old. So,
Hmm. Yeah.
very frustrating.
Yes. Well, we had kids that would not sign on to classes for the entire time that we were remote, and we were remote for the entire first semester, and then halfway through third quarter. So kids didn't that year. Kids did not come back into the actual classroom until right before spring break. And there were some kids that did not log in at all during that entire time. So when they showed up in person, it's like, oh wait, who are you?
Yeah.
That never had a conversation with them before. And yeah, and that's the crazy thing to me is like every single year we go on as if that never happened, but seeing how those gaps, those learning gaps and things have just like grown and grown. And um the habits that were built during that time were grown, and we just don't address those issues.
Yeah.
And that, they just continue to grow. I feel like every single year they continue to grow wider and wider with student behavior, and then just like the lack of any sort of work ethic, and diligence, and finding that grit and determination to finish your work. It isn't there. Kids with their heads on their desks for weeks, and that is something that for me, I'm tired of it.
Well, and rightfully so.
I wish I knew.
This concludes part 1 of Kelly's interview. Don't miss part 2, where Kelly and I continue our discussion, available May 31st. Today's episode was produced and edited by me. The theme music is by Otis McDonald featuring Joni Inez. If you know someone who might enjoy these conversations, please share the podcast episodes as much and as often as you can. It's as simple as copying the link you use to access today's episode and sending it in a message or sharing it on social media. I'm a small, independent operation, and your shares broaden our audience. Perhaps you or someone you know will be inspired to talk about teacher burnout. If you would like to get your voice on my podcast, contact me via the link on my webpage, taught.buzzsprout.com. Coach, speaker, and author Rashid Ogunlaru said, "It may take many voices for people to hear the same message." Join me in being one of the many voices rising up to get the message out around educator burnout. This is Melissa LaFleur. Thank you for listening to Taught, the podcast.
I wish I knew.